They often say the biggest innovations in history happen when the pressure is on. In just over a year's time, the United States goes to the poll to elect another president. At stake, the job of one of the most powerful people on earth. Not surprisingly, every tactic, strategy, tool, and technique will be brought out to fight this campaign, which is all about communications. But this time, there's a tactic which has moved to a whole new level. AI. And who knows where it's going to be in 12 months' time. In today's episode, we'll look at what PRs and communicators around the world can learn from what's happening in the US, plus a whole lot more. You're listening to the Public Relations Podcast.
The Public Relations Podcast with Richard Midson.
Welcome back to the third episode of the brand new format for the Public Relations Podcast. We've got a lot to talk about this week. There's some research out on how the influencer world is diversifying away from pop culture to expert voices. A story of how one agency turned a non-story into a story. We've got a community bag full of questions, your questions on that one. And also, I am joined by an amazing guest today who's got some fantastic insights into the world of corporate politics, all kinds of stuff. We will talk about that in just a few moments' time. Oh, also, there's going to be an AI tool I'm going to be talking about as well that can help communicators brainstorm while out jogging, and it'll even take notes as well. Before we start, though, a huge thank you to Heather Wagner-Reed from last week from Juice Consulting. What a great show that was. Diving into the depths on the Barbie phenomena and how communicators and PR took advantage of that. I don't know whether you saw it. There was a story a couple of days ago that got some attention after the horror and action movie director John Carpenter said in a lighthearted way that he didn't quite understand the movie Barbie. A nice little twist to keep the Barbie narrative alive. I suppose it's like getting someone who hates training shoes to get them to wear them to work for a week and then getting the reaction from it. Also on Heather's campaign, she talked about with freewater.io. I don't know whether you saw or had a look at their social feeds as well. They have this challenge that because they can't get the free bottled water into shops because it's paid for by the advertisers who promote on the labels on the bottles. And that's handled by Free Water themselves. And how would that work with shop economics? So there's a great campaign here, but it's an interesting logistical and communications challenge too. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that one. If you were following that along last week with Heather, it would be fascinating to hear what you think about that too. Right, let me bring my co-host in for this week because it's Nathan Miller from Miller Inc. I love this name, Nathan. First of all.
I like, we the more ink, the better, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it ties into press and PR and the traditions of PR, doesn't it?
Yeah. Ink is just for your audience, INK followed by INC.
Yeah.
Originally, this Miller Inc. and then I needed to be incorporated. And I said, you know what? I actually like this even more. It's just emphatic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's memorable straight away. Listen, you were just telling me that you have got a 6-week-old child. And
yes.
Of course, being in PR and comms, you are working 24/7. How the heck do you manage it?
It's interesting. It's, two things. I have a very strict workout routine that that I'm religious about.
Right.
And, you also I try to limit the amount of coffee I drink, no matter how tired I get. And then everything else is just sort of like this. You just learn how to separate a lot of your personal needs from, the reality of the situation in front of you.
But how do you keep your energy up though? Because it's, one of the things with comms is it isn't a 9-to-5 job, is it? It is a real all-day job. So do you have any, actually this would be a really good one. Do you have any tricks or tips for this? On keeping up your energy levels.
I have a sickness. I work a lot in crisis comms. That's one of our core, and I feed off the energy. I get a lot of energy from this. The phone is always going off. My team thinks I'm a little crazy, but I love the frenetic energy of our world. I like being at the center of so many conversations. I like being able to have a quick reaction, a quick take. And being a short order cook, it's sort of part of my personality. I think it's what I'm really good at and what I enjoy.
It keeps the adrenaline going, doesn't it? It just keeps that energy up. I worked in political PR, as you know, for many years in European politics. And it's the fact that it's a constant crisis, basically. Yeah. It gives you a buzz.
You get it. And you like, there's a part of that quick turn, making very, very kind of spot decisions and then putting something into action and having it be successful that it's one of the things that I get a great buzz from in life. And so I really do enjoy it. I do think in a normal world, trying to sleep is really important. I learned the benefit of that before I had our third child. My other two were 4.5 and 6.5. For a couple of years there, I was sleeping reasonably well. And then, now I'm back to my old ways, but that's kind of how it goes.
There's one other thing I wanted to ask you, because this does strike me on your website. It says on there, public relations is dead. And this is something that you and I both agree on, is that it's the hybrid model now, isn't it? It's about using every technique in the book. But just tell people a bit more about your perspective on it. I've said mine 1,000 times.
Being someone who practices traditional public relations that only does earned media in a narrow way, you're sort of like running a carriage making business in the 1920s or something. Like at some point, it's like it's less and less relevant. I think there are some big exceptions. I think in broadcast still there's an opportunity. If you just do broadcast and you just put people on big TV, there's a window there, although that is becoming less and less valuable. So often, we'll talk about this, I think, when we get into some of the subjects, but, putting someone on Good Morning America may be less relevant than getting a great influencer to put something out on Instagram for them.
But it's amazing, though, how many kind of smaller, I remember going to an event not that long ago, and how many smaller PR teams are still very much focused on saying, well, which magazine do we need to get in? It's like, you look at the bigger agencies, and a lot of them have dropped the word PR from their names. They don't even use it anymore. I think that's because they're recognizing the future, aren't they? This is where it's going.
It totally is. And a lot of those big agencies, where I'm seeing a lot of retrenchment right now, a lot of big layoffs and things like that, because they charge way too much for what they do as well. I think there's an opportunity for those who are small, mid-sized agencies. We have 25 folks. So we're big enough that we can make an impact, and small enough that we don't have to feed a holding company in St. Louis or somewhere else, but you have to be able to deliver and understand the environment that you're in.
Yeah.
Earned media still is extremely important, but you have to understand what it's good for. It's no longer good for reach in the same way that it once was. It's no longer as good for driving top of funnel. It's good for position. It's good for, helping to like really crystallize your story, and the third party validation can be really valuable, although it's not the only way you can get third party validation now. And you have to pair it up with a really good owned and paid strategy so that it feeds into a broader ecosystem. If it does,
it's also about actually having a good story. And, I spent many, many years as a journalist, and that is, always one of the biggest challenges from a PR point of view, is actually coming up with someone you want to use to get earned media. But anyway, honestly, we could talk about this bit for hours. We can make a whole show about it, but let's get straight into some of the things. Some of the little just PR stories that we spotted around this week that helped to show some techniques. And influencer marketing is growing rapidly, but it's not just makeup gurus who are doing it. There's a huge focus on business experts, according to a survey from Opinion for Ogilvy PR. The survey shows expert influencers, so not just nice people to follow, but niche voices with a track record of credibility and deep knowledge in their field, are driving authentic engagement and meaningful results for all sorts of businesses now, according to the survey, with the vast majority of CMOs looking at using influencers, particularly on platforms like LinkedIn and YouTube, but also, amazingly, on TikTok. This story struck me because I remember speaking to Jackie Potter from Ogilvy not long ago, and she was talking about this when she said that you would not believe the rise in B2B conversations happening on TikTok. And I think of TikTok as just being a singing platform.
Or a platform to harvest all your data and send it back to the Chinese.
Well, that's a whole what do you make of it, though? Is the fact that, influencers are being used now for B2B.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm very bullish on LinkedIn in general. I think LinkedIn is incredible. Even though the CPMs are higher than other platforms, I think for B2B, we have a lot of SaaS clients, and I see the tremendous benefit to LinkedIn. LinkedIn basically is now everybody who was on Facebook in the, the odds, and it's now transitioned over because, and I think there's a lot of stuff happening there that's interesting. I do think there's also, we focus a lot on different long tail, kind of very niche focus, owned and earned in different niche areas and I think there's a real opportunity there. If you can get alignment with an influencer who has specific knowledge. I do think that the field is evolving in this area. It's no longer acceptable just to call yourself a thought leader. You have to be a leader and you have to have thoughts, which many folks who are started creating that kind of content do not. And I think the sort of like, there's a glut of, let's call them lifestyle or just sort of.
Well, that's the thing they're saying, isn't it? It's that this is no longer just about the lifestyle ones. It's about saying if you're trying to do something to do with science, you go and find the academic who's been studying it for 30 years, who's written God knows how many papers, but has a following. You go to these people. You don't just go to someone that knows how to put some lipstick on.
Yeah, and listen, and we represent people, biotech, medical apparel, other areas, and you see in each of those areas, there's people who have very strong followings that are very niche. But large, and they what they say has a huge influence. So I think the other thing is you have to think about more just than paying these people and assuming that there's an art and a strategy to creating real alignment. That where you think about asking them to say something that's going to be helpful to them and relevant to them, you're going to get a lot more bang from your buck, and you're going to get to the right audience in the right way.
It's interesting as well, the fact that this isn't just about big organizations anymore. It's looking at the other day at TikTok's, I'm trying to remember their URL for it, but they've got a marketplace, basically. What is it there? creatormarketplace.tiktok.com, where anyone can basically go on there and try and find an influencer or whatever. It depends how many people they've actually got, and try and partner with them through the platform.
Yep.
So it's a kind of anyone can play in this influencer space now, I think.
I think the key is to go one step deeper than that as well. And like the thing that I always caution clients when it comes to this is not being random. Many of them are random. They just think having a lot of followers is relevant. First of all, a lot of those followers aren't necessarily real if you don't choose the right person and you aren't correct. And you have to find someone who does have a real alignment with your brand and what you're trying to say. And I think that's where too many of the influencer agencies, the early iterations of these agencies was just, very focused on lifestyle. So it didn't really matter. And a lot of them were selling campaigns with people with fake followers that didn't have any real influence, and the report and the way that you measure. And I think another thing that's really important that I do think people are wising up to is looking at actual real ROI and tracking it in a more specific way than I think this sort of 1.0 version of what influencer marketing looked like.
Yeah, it's actually having the data behind it, isn't it? I mean, it's that authenticity factor. You just made me think of a case I remember seeing a long time back of a tech firm that had this, what looked like a beauty influencer, talking about how she used the product. And it could not have been more wrong as a connection. Not only did she not look like the kind of people that would use the product, but the way she just said it, she said, something literally like, I like to use this. And it's like, no, you clearly don't. You clearly don't. And just because she had plenty of followers doesn't mean that that's going to convert into action.
Exactly right. And are her followers relevant to your to your thing? Or does the influencer create a brand liability for you? Or does the content, it was funny. I once worked with a Fortune 500 CEO. I won't say who he was. I'll just say he was ex-military. He was kind of a big, tough guy. And they had done this reputation management campaign around him and put all these articles that were like, they lived on the deep depths of the internet, but they still lived there. And my team found him. And one of the articles that they put out was 5 ways to freshen up your look from this guy with this picture right there. And it was just amazing. And, and you wonder like how that happened, which is they hired an agency, which hired an agency, which hired an agency. And someone in some random locale who wasn't really thinking, just put it up and nobody actually bothered to check. Yeah. And so I think that there's like a sense of seriousness and professionalism that sometimes gets lost in some of these like sort of, I would say, PR adjacent fields like influencer marketing, where I think what good agencies do is make sure that they have real accountability and control over all these things.
Yeah, there's not enough strategy behind it. It's just a kind of, that sounds like the right thing to do. And I think that's a problem with PR from the past as well, though, isn't it? It's that there's too much gut and not enough actual data and strategy. But it seems to be changing now, doesn't it? Well, let's move on. TikTok has released a new aging filter, which makes you look old. I don't need that. But anyway, it's not exactly new news. It's been done many times before, but it still managed to generate some coverage. The campaign focused on how young demographics have a negative view of the future and how the aging filters make them think about issues like the effect of time on the planet, on themselves and their lives. What the campaign did was to turn a pretty boring story, frankly, of something not new into an engaging narrative. This one struck me just because I started reading the story and I didn't even know it was about an aging filter at first. And it was all about the planet and, decline and all this and climate change and stuff like that. But I read the story because they hooked it in so strongly into that. And I just thought it was a good example of the importance of story behind what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think you're totally right. Thinking about it is a pretty anodyne observation, right? Or, and that is the key, especially right now. Thinking about what's the angle that's truly different. How do you connect something that's sort of basic to something that's profound and extends beyond any one person or one company? That's what I often have to, when I sit with clients and we talk, it's often the challenge. They say, well, we're doing this thing, but nobody cares about that thing beyond you and a few people in your company or whatever.
Yeah.
Making the story something that's bigger and deeper and more interesting is really important. And that's where I think that's something AI is not going to be able to do anytime so soon. I know we might talk about that in a second, but that's where the value comes from a good PR company, a good strategist.
It's building that connection between the two. I mean, the interesting thing when I was reading that story was I imagine myself back in the newsroom again as a news editor, and I was thinking, well, I was actually hooked into the story. And then it was only at the final bit where I started thinking, you know what? This has been done so many times before. But if I was in a busy newsroom, I might have run that story because it had already engaged me. The story had grabbed me emotionally. I thought, it was presented nicely. It was clear. It was easy to understand. I could have just thrown that in as a quick item. That's
right. That's what news editors are always looking for. And, not the promotional fluff that passes for most press releases these days. So they just kind of go directly to the trash bin.
Okay, so this is part of the show where we do our best to break down a news story or PR moment in the news or current campaigns to see what techniques we can pull out of it that maybe we can all pick something from, whatever our focus or sector. Plus, I'll be asking your perspective as well. Now, in late September, The Hill, a US political website, posed a concerning scenario. A seemingly authentic video implicating a top US presidential candidate in making racial slurs surfaces just 48 hours before the election. Even after the video is proven to be fake, the candidate standing in the polls takes a massive hit. Well, this hypothetical situation turned out all too real in Slovakia's recent elections, where an audio clip purported to reveal election rigging. Because the clip was released during a media blackout period, in the final 48 hours before the actual election, debunking it became a significant challenge. Situations like this, of course, pose serious challenges for PR professionals, whether you are in politics or potentially even running a restaurant these days, because deep fakes and AI-generated content can be produced by virtually anyone and can spread like wildfire across the social media platforms. Now, while regulators in the US are proposing AI-created content should be watermarked and various other things, the challenge remains that anyone in their bedroom can create it. And how many of those people are going to be watermarking it? However, it's not all a challenge. AI is going to allow much more targeted and effective messaging, addressing individual concerns, raising funds from donors in a tailored way that matches their budget and concerns, and facilitating conversations on policies that matter to specific groups. So what can we all learn, whether you're in politics or not, whatever size of business you're running, whatever kind of operation you're in, whether you're an in-house team, whether you're a one-person business, or you've got a big organization, a global organization, what can we learn from what is going on with the use of AI in the US presidential campaign moving up to next year? How can we use it? I mean, the first one, there's a bunch of topics here that I think we can go through, Nathan, but the first one is fake news, isn't it? I mean, the fact that anyone can do it now.
This is a huge part of our practice today, a big part of our crisis practice. I'll tell you, I worked on a very famous case where I had a foreign state actually hack one of my clients, hack the email server, take the contents of their email and weaponize them in a way using both real and fake documents and putting them together to create a narrative that was totally false, and packaging that up and sending it to newspapers. And ultimately it was proven false. But by the time they were proven false and was shown to be forged, it was too late. And those stories had already run.
Yeah. I see it. And how long did it take to actually debunk that?
6 months about before.
Yeah. And by that time, the mud has stuck, hasn't it?
It's exactly right. Yeah. What I see often is people, quote unquote journalists calling people as leverage in different business fights. So someone will pay an influencer or someone who runs a news site, which isn't a real news site. It's just to ask, embarrassing questions to someone's investors or clients or employees. And it used to be that we had a mediated model where journalists had a certain level of integrity. You couldn't just go to the local paper and say, I'm going to pay you, a few $1,000s and I want you to go do this. I mean, well, that happened obviously, but it wasn't as regular. And today I think there's a knowledge gap for many people where something just shows up and they're not quite sure how to deal with it. And you don't have to be a foreign government to be able to engage in this kind of information operation. I see it more and more with just normal run-of-the-mill.
I mean, one of the problems as well with this stuff is that, AI can go out there and look at the kind of trends that are going on, what people would like to get excited by, what they would like to believe rather than reality. And it can be pumping that stuff out, can't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's the whole thing.
I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? It's what people want to believe. You get a story like, look at the Slovakian election, where you get a story come out like that. Now, whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It's a great story. And that's it.
That's right. And I think there's an educational piece of this is teaching kids how to navigate this kind of stuff and not to believe. It used to say, don't believe everything you see on television. Now I'd say it's don't believe everything that you see on the internet. And I think that's a huge civic responsibility that we have. And then I think for businesses, you have to have a level of sophistication when it comes to dealing with this and understanding that it's a threat, and being prepared for it, which is. Do
you think there's a bit of a danger though? Because if you were trying to put out the message that you can't trust anything, then it actually, could that not backfire on when we're actually trying to communicate? Because if we put out an official statement, no one's even going to believe that. So how do we, it's kind of like it's double-edged sword, isn't it? How do we cut through that and actually get messages through to people when no one trusts anything?
I think that the key here is it's not to believe anything. It's just to be judicious and thoughtful about and about what you're seeing and what you're reading and what you're believing and understanding that how the sausage is made. I sometimes say, I don't know if you've seen the show Stranger Things. I don't know if that made it down under, but the Netflix show, the premise of the Netflix show is that it's in the 1980s and there's this place called the Upside Down, which is sort of this alternative universe that the US and the Soviet Union are fighting in the Upside Down. And it's sort of this grotesque, bizarre, crazy world that whatever happens in the Upside Down then gets reflected back into the real world. And I say it's sort of a good metaphor for doing comms today. You have to be able to understand how to live and navigate the Upside Down, all this crazy world, and have it reflect back into our real world. Whereas most people don't even understand that world exists. So I think it's maybe just giving people a little bit of understanding of what goes into the information that we get, how it's, and just having their own ability to navigate, in that environment.
Yes, being aware that this is out there and it's happening. But if you're in a smaller business, I don't know, let's say you've got a small manufacturing business and and someone puts out some fake news and says that your bolts are breaking all the time or something like that. It's like, well, what can you really do? Because the press aren't going to be so interested in you as a story anyway, because you're not a big name. And it's like, this kind of stuff could be put out very easily by your rivals now, even at a fairly micro level.
It's a huge challenge. I think one thing is you have to invest in your credibility as a brand from day one, so that your customers and others don't. If you've lied about 6 other things and then fake news comes, I think authenticity and honesty and investing in building a strong, reputable brand on the front end is really, really important to start. I think speed and getting out ahead of issues when they arise, and then being prepared. Even if you're a small organization, I think doing crisis planning is really important. Who's going to be that designated spokespeople? Having a relationship with an agency ahead of time. Establishing strong communications channels so you're not just sort of living in a silo where somebody else can tell your story for you.
It's a tough one though. This building up this whole reputation beforehand. One of the problems with crisis comms is people often don't think it'll ever be a problem until it hits, does it? And yet building up that emotional equity with your audience beforehand, which is what PR and comms is all about, is so important. So how do you sell that to people, so to speak, when they haven't hit that crisis yet? Exactly. Yeah.
You're identifying the problem. Some people do get it. I'd say it's maybe even split, but a lot of the times what we do is then we're in a repair mode when something like this happens, and you have to get people get their head around it. If you don't live and breathe it every day, it's a harder sell. I often tell people it's my job to be paranoid for you, because it is, and when you've seen everything and you understand how bad things can get, it begins to inform how you maybe make some decisions on the front end for folks. But it's not always easy, and it requires a level of strategic thinking that doesn't always come easily for folks.
Do you think that AI can help in actually tackling this stuff? Because you've got, like the Microsoft's video validator, you've got Sentinel, I think, is it Adobe are working on stuff as well with video in particular. But do you think AI can help actually tackle some of these crisis issues?
I think we're about 3 or 4 iterations from the moment when they can be helpful. I think that they're going to be able to mess things up before they can make things helpful, I think is my bet. But yes,
it's an arms race, isn't it? As always, it takes time to build up your defense. Yeah,
that's right. Just like, before you had a lot of security folks, you had a lot of hackers who figured out how to get into your computer. So I think that will be the nature of how this works. But yeah, I do think eventually there may be a solve in that sense. Yeah. Be very interesting.
Is there any way that you're using AI for this kind of thing yet?
We are using AI for specific discrete tasks. Like the other day, we had a list of 100,000 contacts, people who run foundations, and we wanted to separate them into private and corporate foundations. And we found an AI script, and it wrote it really effectively. We're using it for certain kind of research tasks. I've been engaged.
It's that number crunching that it's really powerful at.
It's really powerful, and it can be really specific and useful. I was working with a bigger group of comms folks and they were using it to create videos. I still find that the output is below average at best. And people who are going to hire us expect better than the kind of quality that then it produces. I sometimes joke. It's also true. I just wrote an op-ed that we put in Forbes this week about what the impact of AI will be on the communications business. It's also true that we have a writing prompt that we give potential folks to get past the first screening interview. ChatGPT probably does as well as 50% of our initial applicants on that prompt, which is like it talks to you. It says something about the state of the current field in terms of skills and everything else, but it's still mediocre. And it still will never pass, and what I think it will do is replace the need for people who write mediocre press releases.
Yes. Yeah. It's the low level stuff, isn't it? It's that low level just pumping out. I mean, this is why, copywriters have got a real problem on that basic, just simple stuff. It's that edge on top of it. You've got to have that experience. So it's actually going to be harder to get into the industry, I think, as well, isn't it?
That's exactly right. No, the entry level jobs, where that's a main function there's less and less need. I don't need a body to write a mediocre press release anymore.
Yes.
Not that I ever would want to put one out, but a lot of people do. And a lot of agencies, sort of going back to what we talked about earlier, PR is dead. There was a lot of agencies built on that model. Let's write a mediocre press release, send it to a bunch of journalists, hope a couple of people write on it. We'll call it a day. Yeah. And we'll do that. And that's a commodity business, and it's not that expensive, and people can hire us. But the value of that is so low now that, your client can go into ChatGPT, have them write a mediocre press release, have them generate a media list, and they'll send it out. They don't have to pay you.
Yeah, and then the AI bot in the newsroom just ignores it as well. It's just you just imagine this AI, just conversation going on between two bots achieving nothing, can't you? I mean, there was one other point I did want to raise, which is the whole micro-targeting aspect. I remember many years ago reading a whole Obama campaign and stuff where they were talking about how they were changing the messages to donors several times a day to try and see which was most optimized. But that was a human doing it. Now you've got the opportunity potentially for AI to look at every single person and tailor a message and an amount of donation to give to every single person, haven't you? I mean, there's amazing micro-targeting potential here.
I think that's actually also very, very, very interesting. Whether it's a nonprofit fundraising or a SaaS product selling to another business owner or pitching a journalist. I mean, a lot of these tools now have these built-in AI functions, and I get very excited when I read the features. And once I get into the product, I immediately find it useless and not very effective.
Yeah.
I think the tools are still a ways away from actually being able to do what they claim they can do. But
Yeah.
yes, think about how amazing it would be if you just gave it an AI bot a story. You said, I want to find every reporter who's covered, the sustainability aspects of cultured meat. And then I want you to write an email that says, I saw this story, and this story. And I think, and then tailor whatever our pitch is to those last stories they wrote. And, and think about, the general editorial line of their paper and pull all that together into a pitch. You can imagine how that could be in the near future develop, which could be exciting and interesting.
But also directly marketing to individual consumers, isn't it? I think that's the thing as well. It's about tailoring your message, because this is the problem, isn't it? Now you've got such a fragmented society. We're no longer talking about just one customer persona anymore. We're talking about so many of them, and they're all in different ways, reacting with different social groups and all that. So it's got the potential.
And the bot can integrate feedback in real time and constantly be tweaking the message based on what people are saying and everything else. Yeah, you can see it. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah. Let's move on to your campaign. I mean, we could talk about, we're bound to talk about AI for years to come, frankly, but let's talk about your campaign. I'm always interested in hearing about something that you have personally been working on recently and some of the things that you've been learning from it as well. So tell us all, what have you got in mind?
So something that I've been working on recently, we've had, the real estate market in the States, particularly in California, where we're headquartered, it's kind of in the dumps, and people are dealing with some challenging, trends in terms of commercial real estate. I wanted to just share two recent campaigns we did related to very big properties where people needed to kind of change the narrative and drive success. So I had one client who was a big fashion brand. They had a big flagship property in downtown Los Angeles. And they went bankrupt, and they needed to sell the headquarter buildings. And the building had, we went and we toured it. We looked at it. We were thinking about how can we, tell a story. For those who aren't familiar with the trends in real estate, downtown LA is sort of, since COVID, been really in a bad situation. Lots of homelessness and other things. Not such a desirable area. The building was very cool. It was a 19 teens kind of historic, very cool property. Then we walked to the side and we saw that there was this mural on the building, and we said, "What's this mural?" And they said, "Oh, that's done by a very famous artist named Banksy." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know who Banksy is." And I said, "This is our campaign. It's not
exactly. There's a story. Yeah,
we're selling a mural.
Yeah,
and it happens to be on a building, and so
the building's attached to it. Yeah,
so we created a campaign that was basically buy the Banksy, get the building for free, and we got a huge 4,000 word spread in the New York Times real estate Sunday section, which was and we had and then we decided, we're going to take it a step further. So we had a giant celebrity party at this building with lots of famous people. And, there were some whispers around to the media that Banksy may have also attended the party. That was sort of,
there were some whispers. Yeah.
Got an unbelievable amount of attention for just a commercial real estate listing in the property sold. And, they did quite well on the back end. So that was one thing we did interesting. And just in a related campaign, we had a client who was selling, who bought Gene Simmons' house here in LA and and did a big, and just put it on the market. It hasn't sold yet, but last weekend we did a similar thing. We did a day of curated events, one after another. So we partnered with a media outlet to do a major conference on real estate. And this property is unbelievable. Probably sell for $55 million. Right. And we had this big conference for sort of real estate leaders. We got every broker in town into this conference at the property, amazing food and drink. And then it was followed by a celebrity poker tournament in the evening with 100, probably 30, 40 cameras. And we probably got, 400 pieces of media and social and everything else. So everybody in town knows about this property, but it's a case of, you can't just take something at the surface. And it was interesting because people never would have, paired a sort of buttoned up. It's a luxury, but business publication focused called C-Suite Quarterly. They're the paper of record for the private aviation industry here in the States. It was a very upscale, real estate thing with sort of more of a kind of glitzy, glamorous poker tournament. But a lot of the people who stayed at the beginning, who came to the real estate conference, ended up staying for the poker tournament, which was our intention. They raised a lot of money for charity, and they got a great media outcome for our clients. So we're always thinking about how do you look at a situation that on its face is kind of boring and turn it into something that's more interesting.
Exactly.
And that's not going to cost the client an arm and a leg.
One question I love asking people when they talk about their campaigns is, PR comms is always changing. Is there anything that you've noticed in those recent campaigns where you've adopted a new idea or something, something you've noticed, a trend that you've been able to jump on?
Yeah. I think that if you have the ability to create the news, you sometimes need a little bit of budget, but not a lot of budget. Like, I think that $20,000-$30,000 can go a long way in making a huge impact if it's deployed properly. And instead of deploying it on, some people come to me and say, I want to do paid media or something like that. Sometimes a really effective, creative kind of stunt like this can be an order of magnitude more effective than just putting some money into paid. And that's often what we think about is like, could this be deployed more, differently, reconfigured in an interesting way, especially with smaller budgets. I think that that's really important.
Yeah, come up with an actual story that people want to cover, and it's going to give you a lot of a leg up. I mean, newsrooms want to cover good stuff. Influencers want to cover good stuff, don't they? That's the thing.
Exactly. That's the whole thing.
Cool. We've got a couple more bits to do. Just very quickly, a quick AI thought of the week. And then we've got the community bag as well. And this was that if you imagine brainstorming aloud with AI, coming up with campaign ideas, discussing ideas, if you don't mind the chance that this might all be shared on ChatGPT or whatever platform you're using, then there was something I was trying the other day where by putting my headphones and I was talking to ChatGPT's new conversational setting. If you go into the beta settings on there, and you can turn it on, and then you click on the headphones, and you can literally have a conversation with it. And it started off with that sort of very generic response. I was asking it about a sport I follow, which is World Rally Championship, and the fact that there's been a whole load of debate about the fact that it's not as popular as it used to be and all this kind of thing. And I was having this discussion. I was saying, well, look, these are the challenges that the sport has. And it was coming back with ideas. And this was when I was going for a walk, a 20-minute walk. So I didn't have a notepad in my hand or anything like this. So it was just really interesting that it was firing ideas back at me that got me really thinking, but also it was actually coming up with some interesting ideas too. So if you fancy having a go with having a conversation with AI and brainstorming aloud, and also having a thread afterwards that you can then go back and go, actually, that was a load of rubbish, but that was quite a good idea, then you might want to try that out. It's fascinating.
That. Very interesting.
Right, let's talk about the community bag. We've got a couple of questions. I'll just say also, we did that survey in the first show as well. I'll bring that back actually as we go through the series on this one as well, where we ask you what you think about some of the issues. But obviously, it's still quite new, this brand new format, so we didn't get a lot of response. But I will say that we were talking about Chipotle and the fact that some influencers came up with an idea for a new menu item for a quesadilla. And it took, was it like 5 months until the chain actually introduced this onto the menu. But it worked really well. It was massively successful as a campaign. Sales went up hugely, and it was talked about a lot by influencers. And I was asking you whether you have had the opportunity to jump on moments like that before, whereby you dropped your own campaign and went with what influencers were talking about instead. And the answer I got back in the survey was that most people found that their clients didn't want to change from the original plan, which is quite interesting. Have you had experience with that? No,
yeah, it's very frustrating. Sometimes here's the problem is that depends. The bigger the client, the more bureaucratic and the more that approvals drives. Marketing already approved this, and we don't want to reopen it and tell them that it's like a bad idea. So we're rather just going to be content with failure. I find that smaller organizations have a little more nimbleness, or when you have a CEO who's decisive and nimble and kind of can move the beast, but the politics of that internally can often be challenging in getting people to sort of acknowledge that this maybe wasn't the best idea.
Is there anything you can do? I mean, one of the things we were talking about in that show was about when you actually get on board with a client is making it clear that this is a strategy that we want to take. So actually trying to predefine that and say, we are going to be looking for influencers. Do you think that's effective?
I think so. The more that you can define up front, how things are going to work, but
it's still tough. Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a breath of fresh air when you get a client that really is results oriented and not process oriented. I mean, I find it frustrating sometimes where you have a client and they'll be happy and they'll be content, but I often tell my team, you can only make the client as good as they want to be. You can lead in the water, but if they don't want to take things forward, then it sort of is what it is, and that is frustrating because when you see like sort of money on the table or opportunity, and you say, guys, I know, just trust me. I'm not shy about articulating that view.
I love that phrase. Say that phrase again. You said you can only make a client as good as they want to be.
they want to be. Yeah.
That's a brilliant phrase.
Because they'll say, well, the client wants to do this thing that's going to be really stupid for them. And I'll say, push back.
Yeah.
Engage a little less politely. And if they still don't want to do it, they're paying the bill and it's their life. So, we've got to kind of go along with what they want. And sometimes they're right, by the way. Sometimes we're wrong, but oftentimes you can see something ahead of time and it is very frustrating.
Yeah. And based on your experience as well. Let's go through a couple of questions. And the first question we had was, we work in the medicinal cannabis space and part of our work is educating lawmakers and the public. A lot of people ask us for case studies of people who have benefited from using it. Do you have any advice on how to pick the right people to put forward? I've got a thought on this, but I'd love yours first, Nathan.
So this is influencers. How do you match the right?
So this is putting forward case studies to the press, I suspect. Educating lawmakers and the public, yeah.
Case studies for the press. Yeah. I think that people sometimes there's two things. One, you have to really I think I always say to our team, the 3 core pillars of every good strategic communications program: audience, objective, message. What are you trying to achieve? Objective. Audience, who are you trying to reach? Message. What message moves your audience in the direction of your objective? Many people don't have a good time of inhabiting the mind of their audience and understanding what is really going to move and motivate that audience. Sometimes you have to take a step back. Just because a case study was really impactful for you, you have to think, is this really going to motivate whoever you're trying to move and motivate? So that's the first thing. And then, figuring out exactly case studies where you can be more specific. The more that you can clearly define what you did, how you did it, why it was successful, I think is really important. A lot of times I'll get case studies from clients that we'll see that are kind of ambiguous, bland, high level. They'll say, well, there's trade secrets. I'll say, well, maybe we shouldn't choose that case study then. So the more that you can be really specific in reaching your audience and helping them really understand why this is a value proposition for them, I think that's important.
I remember having a conversation with someone actually in the same space a long time back, and they were saying that they got an amazing case. They were trying to convince older men that this was a good idea, or that it should be introduced as an option in the place that they were doing this. And they were talking about the case study that they got, and it was this young guy with tattoos that was the kind of, I'm stereotyping a bit now, but he kind of was wearing the duffel coat, and it looked very young and kind of a little bit down and out. And I was saying, well, the problem here is that you're actually just reinforcing the stereotype.
Yeah.
You're not actually convincing them. What you need to do is find someone that matches their demographic and show how someone in their demographic benefited from it, because then you're going to convince them, because they're going to go, oh, that person's like me. That was my thought when I saw that question.
That's interesting. Exactly. You want to create the world that they aspire to, not the world that they believe that they might not be, might be less interested in.
Yeah, that's
right. It's a double-edged sword sometimes when, this is something that's interesting. People, when you have really attractive people in case studies, sometimes it can be really good and sometimes it can be really bad.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to think about what's the visceral reaction. Sometimes it's not even rational. It's more emotional. And there's something like beneath the surface. What is this person, if he sees this other person come in, and you have to kind of deal with all the prejudices and craziness of human beings. And it's an educated guess. Polling sometimes can help, or focus groups, things like that. But you think about, is this going to actually, how is this going to jive with this person? And great communicators sort of have an intuitive feeling around that.
The other question, we've kind of covered this in a way, but let's ask it anyway. We've been looking at using AI to write press releases. How good do you think AI is at this currently? I mean, we've basically been saying, well, it can write a basics. It can come up with a very rough draft, but it's not going to add that PR level, is it? Your thoughts,
I would say
Nathan?
C- is would be the normal average.
That's the grading.
Yeah. But better than most entry-level people in PR right now. So that's like, I think it's about the sign of the state of the industry and writing skills, at least in America. I don't know about in Australia. But yeah, they're not adequate to do the job in a profession.
It'll write something, but it's not going to turn heads.
Yep.
Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really appreciated. I know you're an incredibly busy person, and you've got to get back to your kids as well at some point.
I do.
Got to fit it in some.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, no, I really appreciate it. What are you up to next then? What sort of campaigns have you got coming up next?
Oh, we have about 60 clients. So all sorts of things.
Any big ones that you're looking forward to that you personally really want to get your teeth into? It's a bit different.
We're doing a big rollout for a biotech company that is transitioning to the cultured meat space, and we have some big announcements for them in some other areas where they're actually taking a technology that replicates cells at scale. So they're going to basically the future of manufacturing, and they have a couple new partnerships we're announcing with some integrated influencers. They're a publicly traded company, so there's some elements of going to NASDAQ and planning some events there globally. I'm very excited about that.
There's a bit of learning in there as well. I mean, presumably you're not an expert on cellular.
No, fascinating. I love it. It's so totally.
It is one of the fun things about PR, though, isn't it? I remember going to a conference one time, and this guy was trying to tell me all about electric car battery technology. And I was really trying to focus, and this was when I was a journalist. I was really trying to focus. I just couldn't take it in. I finally said, look, what do you mean? Really started to try and break it down. And then it was a really interesting story. And so often there are fascinating stuff in this science.
That's definitely true. I love learning. I love being at the heart of solving problems. We represent a lot of affordable housing developers. Housing is a huge issue in the US. People who are reimagining this thing that's been just a chronic problem for America. And how do you, in communities all across the country, how do you create lessons learned? And so that's an area where we've had a lot of growth and, interest and excitement. And it's been really fun. There's, so much. So
Nathan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And just remember, if you're running a campaign as well, let me know what you are up to and a little bit about it. I would love to get you on the show as well. This show, as I've said before, is not just about thought leaders, or we talked about thought leaders before. What actually is a thought leader? It's about people who are on the front line of PR today, the people on the cold face, on the front line, whatever you want to call it, the people who are actually grinding away trying to make this stuff happen today, and the conversation that we are having. Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget, you can get the newsletter as well. It's free every week. It's a roundup of my thoughts from each episode at thepublicrelationspodcast.com. You will see all the links on there. Whatever you are up to this week, whether you're in the biotech sector, the AI sector, whether you're doing restaurants, whether you've got a corporate brand going on around the world, I wish you the very best of luck, and I hope you have an absolutely fantastic week, and I'll speak to you next week.